Have a quorum. We'll start the meeting. Kathy, will you do roll call?
Heather Henry.
Here.
Artie Silverstein. Luis Ianez.
Here.
Erica Sparhawk.
Here.
Ben Baumfalk. Lonnie Kitching.
Here.
Dan Richardson.
Here. All right. The first order of business is the consent agenda. We have 6 items on there. Item A is the accounts payable. Item B is trustee minutes from January 8th. Item C is trustee minutes from January 15th. Item D is the recommendation for appointment to the Board of Adjustment. Item E is the letter of support for Carbondale Senior Housing. And item F is the Gateway House renovation and repair contract. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
No.
Is that a motion, Lonnie?
Oh, yeah. Move to approve the consent agenda for this evening. Second.
Motion by Lonnie, seconded by Heather. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed say no. Okay, motion passes. We're in for a long ride tonight, everybody. All right, item number 3 is persons present not on the agenda. I know we have Mr. Harvey. You know the drill. 3 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm going to this one, not that
Yeah.
one. You know.
Give us your address, be nice, or we'll boot you out of here.
Okay. You said it to everybody, right? It's,
Everybody.
my name's Alan Harvey. I live at 957 Buckingham Drive in the Wheel Circle neighborhood, Carbondale. And I sent you all a letter from the Western Leaders Network addressing oil and gas development and air quality regulations that are currently being considered by a task force that was set up by the Air Quality Control Commission, which is a state body that oversees kind of those matters and air quality issues. The letter is really an opportunity. It really addresses about, and I hope you've all read it. I do have some copies here, and we can make some copies if you want them. But it addresses some kind of high-level issues of such as statewide application of the rules. There were some changes to air quality regulations in November 2017 that only were applied on the Front Range, and that's left us kind of exposed with some older rules that probably could use tightening up. So statewide application of new rules, protection of residential areas, and really looking at ways to tighten up monitoring and repair of oil and gas infrastructure, whether it's a well or a pipeline or a storage facility, within a certain distance of residential areas. Tightening controls on climate change. The NASA discovered a giant methane cloud over the San Juan Basin a few years ago, I think in 2014 or 15, and it's formed every year, and it's really attributed to about 5 to 10 oil and gas developers in that area contribute about half of the methane that they think that's in that cloud. So really these controls, this is a source of real pollution. And then using regulatory rather than voluntary goals. Certainly it'll probably end up being a mix of those, but we want to, and there are certainly oil and gas operators who play by the rules and do their best to keep the air clean, but there's others who don't. And it's one of those industries where ownership's constantly shifting, and it really kind of makes sense to have that strong rules. So I'm working with the Western Leaders Network that's based down in La Plata County. Gwen Latchell, the county commissioner down there, works with them, and it's really it's looking a way of kind of networking with West Slope elected officials to help them provide a voice. There is some. So this is really aimed at the more progressive counties and municipalities. We're talking to Pitkin, Route, La Plata, San Miguel, Gunnison. That's an example of the counties. Eagle, I've reached out to as well. And then there's and towns like Carbondale and Basalt and Aspen and Telluride, and so we've really kind of networked that way. But there is another group of counties, and Garfield County's among them, that are kind of pushing back against new regulations, and they've been very involved in the process. But it's got another year to go, and we thought it was an important opportunity to come in and really represent communities, get elected officials to sign on and just say, these are big issues, please address these responsibly, to this task force that's looking into this for the Air Quality Control Commission. The task force is called the State Hydrocarbon Emissions Reduction Task Force. That's the official name. So it's written in a way that you can sign it individually if you want, if you just as an elected official you want to, or you guys can act as a board. Certainly that has a different weight than individual elected officials. So I'd appreciate if you could consider this. February, I think 14th is the deadline for kind of getting comments in on new initiatives before the Share Task Force. So hopefully you guys could get this considered, and maybe by about early February the 6th or so, or sign individually, like I said.
Okay.
And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alan. So, as Alan said, we all received the email. As I followed up, said we have a couple different options. I do think this isn't necessarily straightforward. I shouldn't say it that way, but we should be considerate of the issues if we're going to act as the board. But at the same time, if we won't meet again until the first Tuesday in February.
Okay.
So does anybody feel strongly about acting? Obviously, we can all act individually after this meeting, but does anybody feel strongly about signing on as a board tonight? Anybody?
Not particularly, no.
Okay. I just have heard some feedback, Alan, so I think this was something that if we were to consider, if the deadline was a little bit longer, we could put it on that first February meeting to really discuss. But since we don't have that opportunity, I think we're probably going to act individually.
Okay. All right. That's fine. When is the first meeting in February? Is it
8th.
The 12th.
It's the 8th.
It's the 8th. So.
Isn't it the 8th?
12th.
12th? Okay.
8th is a Friday.
Well, you know, and certainly I will nail that date down for you guys so that you know it's either the 11th or the 14th. So I will nail that date down and
get back to me on that.
Get back to you on that. So, but I would encourage you to act individually if you feel compelled, and then the board can act separately as well. So I think if you feel moved by this issue, and it matters. I mean, we do have ozone issues as well on the western slope. They're not as big as the Front Range, but there are some real air quality issues out here. So hopefully we'll get some good regs in place. I know we have a new administration, and we can press hope on that, but this is a process that's been underway for quite a bit of time, and it's got a lot of stakeholders involved in it, and I have a feeling they'll develop regulations out of this process as a result of that. So,
okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
I'll be signing on. So.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Yep.
Thanks, Alan.
Right. Thank you. Carrie? Or is there anyone else? I just know Carrie wanted to speak, so.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Carrie, and we're representing Carbondale Middle School, GSA, which is Gay Straight Alliance. It's a national network.
Carrie, would you also just give your address so we have, for the record, we do that?
180 Snowmass Drive,
Okay.
Carbondale, Colorado.
Right.
Whew. All right, so we're a national. We are a local, and it's part of a national network, which is a next generation LGBTQ or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer racial and gender justice organization. And what it is to empower queer, trans, and allied youth leaders to advocate and organize and mobilize intersectional movements to safer schools and healthier communities.
CMS GSA is building awareness as well as prevents discrimination and bullying in our school. We stand for social change that extends beyond individual schools. CMS GSA hopes to make a direct impact for LGBTQ+ youth and help improve school climates. Many GSAs begin as social group, and over time, students are motivated to use their collective voice and power to create real changes in school through anti-slur campaigns, days of LGBTQ+ sensitivity or awareness, teacher trainings, and even speak to school district officials about what they need to live authentically and thrive in school. Every GSA can create its own mission and goals to meet the different needs of its members and their individual school climates. GSA focuses on leadership development and activism that prioritizes building alliances, not only across sexual orientation and gender identity lines, but also across race, ethnicity, and class lines.
Healthy Kids Colorado 2017 data reveals significant gaps in overall health and risks facing LGBTQ+ students. LGBTQ+ students reported being called mean names or bullied because of their actual or perceived sexual orientation, 40 times more than students who identified as straight. LGBTQ+ students are twice more likely to miss school because they do not feel safe. LGBTQ+ are 3 times more likely to feel sad or hopeless, 4 times more likely to hurt themselves, consider suicide, and attempt suicide. At the same time, LGBTQ+ students are less likely to speak to adults about their sadness and isolation. Studies have shown that GSAs lower the risk of student suicide and improve overall community safety.
CMS GSA has grown in numbers and has prioritized education, safety, community, and inclusivity. We hope to build a community-wide understanding and support for all community members. Our GSA believes that LGBTQ+ education is important for Carbondale so all people can feel welcomed and accepted. We hope all people feel supported and are able to stand up for friends who identify as LGBTQ+. CMS brings in speakers to educate students, faculty, and to increase awareness and understanding to help all students feel safe. CMS hosted our first campus Pride Week and raised money to continue our efforts to build safe spaces in our community. CMS GSA will continue to create safe spaces in parks with rainbow sidewalks, pride events, and educational opportunities for community members. We hope the town of Carbondale will consider ways to support all members through supporting annual Pride Month during the month of June. Pride is universally recognized and comes to life in towns by hosting pride parades and showing their support with the rainbow flag to build inclusivity and awareness that are all supported. We hope the town of Carbondale will build in safe spaces and signs to create a colorful presence to build a support system to help all students and families feel included and safe. From CMS GSA, thank you.
Awesome.
Any questions?
So I was mesmerized by what you were saying. I also forgot to ask for your names. Do you mind telling us your names?
My name's Ania.
My name's Lucy.
And full names, please, because we're going to put you in our record.
Ania Johnson.
Okay?
Lucy O'Byrne.
Annabelle Stableford.
All right. Thank you. We do have, at least I have a question. Can you narrow down, I know, Carrie, you and I talked about a specific request. Ms. Stableford, you just mentioned some general things that we could do. Is there, sounds like you, based on our conversation, Carrie, you'd like for there to be a discussion on an agenda, a future agenda? Yeah.
Our GSA has compiled 4 buckets addressing education for the community and opportunities of what that could look like. Also inclusivity and safety and looking at community aspects. And part of that is just representing the rainbow flag, which is internationally known as inclusive for all members and safety, and each color represents a different, kind of point to what we represent. And that's usually flown in the month of June. We're also looking at the town chamber and supporting us in our first Pride event held here in Carbondale, Colorado. And we would love to have the community and families and businesses and the town council to be in support of that as well. We've also considered working with the Art Council and looking at opportunities for safe spaces, which would include either human rights or even just a rainbow presence, whether it's a sign or a flag, whether that's in our parks, just knowing that this is a safe zone, that we respect everybody, and all are invited. I know some communities have even changed bathroom signs to represent and be inviting for all individuals in our community. And our really overall need was just seeing the rising conversation in our school district.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm wondering, when you and I spoke, it sounded like there were some specific things that would warrant discussion from our board that we would officially endorse or not. Is that still the case?
So yeah, essentially the Pride Parade and the Pride events, taking a stance, looking at inclusivity of how they vocalize and support LGBTQ plus community members.
Okay.
And as a whole community itself, what it represents around the issue.
Okay. Heather.
Yeah.
2 questions and then a thought.
Okay.
Do the other schools in Carbondale have their own GSA chapter?
So that's one thing that we've reached out and recognized it does not exist. So our GSA as a middle school compared to any other school from RE1 to RE2 district has received a lot of recognition. We have currently anywhere from 50 plus members attending every week. And a lot of other schools have struggled, and RE2 district right now has even said because of politics and lack of support and a lot of resistance, they were not even allowed to build one. And so it's about support and looking at how we can take a stance to help families. And I will say I even have kiddos who say that they're not allowed to participate if their family's new. So there's a lot of opportunities around conversations and kickback and opportunity for education because people don't understand what it is. So not all schools have one.
So right now your 50 members are mostly the middle school.
We are the largest GSA in our valley.
And is your thought in this effort to broaden that so more people from the outside would be able to join your chapter?
So more schools will recognize that GSAs are safe spaces and that they shouldn't be a threat. It's about supporting all students. It's not one or the other exclusive in any way. So educating that all schools should have a GSA.
Thought?
So then the other thought was, in addition to some of these requests or as a part of it, it kind of reminds me of the stance that we took on immigration.
Exactly.
So, and especially in light of things happening in government at a much higher level, this way to really make a statement on a local level. And I don't know if you are familiar with that process, but same issues kind of came forward. Erica, you were a part of a side group that got together and then essentially crafted a resolution. That we passed. That was codified really our stance on immigration. So this very much reminds me of that kind of an effort.
Yeah.
And one that I would personally like to support.
Okay. So I think maybe what Heather's getting at is, and I too would like to be part of that. So maybe we get together. Is there anyone else who would want to be part of that as a little ad hoc committee to figure out?
I could help out, yeah.
Okay. So we have sort of like a subcommittee where we talk about it before we come back and have a meeting so we can hash out and think about, is it a resolution? Is it something physical or not? So why don't you and I just follow up and we'll schedule a meeting for this ad hoc group to get together and figure out how best we can support your efforts, because I think we do. Mm-hmm. And does that make sense, Carrie?
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
And then I would just say thank you for coming to speak. I'm impressed with how thoughtful and articulate all three of you were. So thank you for your efforts and keep it up.
Thanks for your time.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to address the board on an item that's not on the agenda? Okay. Moving on to trustee comments. Anybody got any?
I have nothing.
Sure. So, you go first. I was just talking.
I'm going to CC4CA, Colorado Communities for Climate Action, and for the listening audience, I sit on the policy committee and the legislative committee, and so I do have the links for the bills that are being both monitored, and then ones that CC4CA takes a position on. So I'll send those out. The monitored ones might be of interest to like the e-board. There's actually 2 on there that I think the e-board might be interested in. Okay. So I thought if you want to, you could be the one to send them those ones. Sure. And so I just wanted to give you a heads up that I was going to send that out. And we've already got bills that we're taking positions on, so you'll see that on the positions list as well. And if you have questions about any of those, feel free to follow up with me.
All right. Thanks, Erica.
Yep.
I have a few. First, I just want to compliment staff on the reports this quarter. I was just struck more so than usual just at how well the town is running right now. Not only the finance reports and how timely the information is and how detailed, so I appreciate that. I don't know if you all noticed in the Parks and Rec report just how usage is going up and really what a fantastic job they're doing. And Kevin's crews with everything running pretty smoothly for the most part, and being ahead of the game on the chip and seal. It just, I wish the public could read those reports because I feel like the town's being run very well right now. So thank you for all your efforts. Just quickly, I had a good call with Risa. I'm forgetting her last name, but she's the substance, do you remember her title?
The tobacco prevention
Tobacco
specialist.
prevention specialist. Thank you, Jay. And I had asked her, what would you do if you were us? And she threw out a lot of ideas. She's really been, I think, brainstorming. She talked about another community, well, not a community, another stakeholder meeting where we kind of do a gap analysis of what's missing. She reminded us of the text line that's available to kids now to as young as age 12 to reach out if they have questions about vaping or tobacco use. She threw out the idea that I think Crested Butte does, where the discounted ski passes that the youth receive in Crested Butte are contingent upon not using tobacco products and things of that nature, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then she brought up two bills that are in the legislature this year. One is 1033, which would essentially allow us to license, take over licensing without losing the share back, as we've been told we would lose. It also would give authority to counties to raise age limits to 21, similar to what we did. And then there's another bill that would include e-cigarettes in the indoor air quality laws. So just so you know, if you want to track those. But anyway, it's just good to know that Reese is there, and I had a good conversation and felt a lot better about that. So coming up tomorrow, I've been asked to speak at a luncheon for the Garfield County Republicans about short-term rentals. If anybody has any thoughts on those, I'm just going to share what I feel like our thoughts and actions have been in the past. And then we've got the FMLD grant luncheon on Friday to congratulate us on grants we've received and all the work that staff has put into that. So that's what I have. And I didn't attend RAFTA, so I don't know if there was anything.
Yeah, I can add a little bit about RAFTA. I was trying to get the agenda up because it's been a little while. It was over a week ago. RAFTA was, I'd say, mostly updates on their strategic plan for the year, that they've done a really nice job taking all the kind of ideas that were put together in a project list when they went to the voters and were successful with that property tax initiative this past November. And so, you know, it's just great to see stuff actually going from idea to reality and starting to appear on the list. So I don't have it in front of me to detail all of them. And there was a nice article in the Post-Independent that you might have seen where they focused on the projects kind of town by town, especially Newcastle, Glenwood, and Carbondale. And in Carbondale, we'll very soon see that they'll be running the circulator more frequently. They're going to be running more frequent service all the way down to Newcastle, and then looking into the bike share expansion, which we're going to be talking about soon. So nothing else major, I don't think, that deserves an update from that.
Thanks, Ben. Anybody else?
Oh, sorry, there was one other thing I just wanted to mention because I think it'll probably come to us. The RAFTA board had a presentation from a group. It was an immigration resolution called the People's Resolution, and the RAFTA board didn't have the votes to support it. They had a majority, but they need sort of a supermajority, 7 of the 9 or whatever it is, to adopt anything like that. So we might see it, and it's essentially based on the experiences of the 4 people in Colorado who are undocumented immigrants who've gone into sanctuary, and what policies could be promoted that would change their situations and others in similar situations. So it's just sort of a statement of support, but it's for some pretty specific policy ideas, and nobody on the board was opposed to that philosophically, or if they did, they didn't express that. It was that RAFTA was trying to stay pretty narrowly focused on transit-related issues, and there just wasn't a real clear tie. But we may see that. It's called the People's Resolution, and Dorothea Ferris has kind of taken the lead in that group.
Thanks, Ben.
Yep.
Heather?
So you all saw Jay forwarded the final, presumed final version of the affordable housing study. So I wasn't here for the work session last week. I was just curious how we kind of might want to proceed in terms of, I think there's at least some data points out of that report that it seems like could continue to inform the discussion around our final housing guidelines. So I'd be happy to kind of take the lead on like trying to boil that down into something. Right, there's a lot of data there. Trying to boil that down into what I think are pertinent things, at least to think about for changes or refinements to our current guidelines, if that would be helpful. And then I wanted to just talk about timing. If we were to kind of look at those things, do we want to see some of the presentation from our consultants at EPS and RRC, prior to that, so we can like dig into some questions or have a little bit of that information, see those presentations, and then make some very refined decisions? Or what do you all think? This is my first.
So we did talk about some specific bits of information that we would like to see before we, before we address the changes in the UDC, or?
I think it was more the annual update to the affordable housing guidelines, and
right,
particularly the AMI levels, and whether we need to relook at those, and hoping we could distill that out of the study. I haven't had a chance to read that yet, so has anybody else read it to the point where you'd feel comfortable? So maybe, I think we just need to...
I could help kind of narrow that down to some things to look at, and then...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and also just, is the report so good that we don't need a presentation, or, you know what I'm getting at? I don't know what I don't know yet.
Sure.
So...
Yeah. I think regardless, a presentation by our consultants is going to be helpful. I think we're still not exactly sure what that was going to look like, because there was only like 3 scheduled. So there was an idea whether they were just more community and we got together, but there was like a portion first for kind of elected officials and then a larger open house, and they delivered that in 3 different places. Or whether they were going to come direct to us and then do bigger community open houses, because the part of those presentations is definitely to present that information to a larger group of people. So what I was going to focus on was distilling some of the information direct to some of Carbondale's community housing. I think what they would help do is put that vast amount of information into the context of the larger multi-jurisdictional issues that and data that came out of the report. So they're really probably 2 different things.
I'd say whatever you're willing to do, we'd all be welcome to seeing that. And I do think it makes sense for us to fully digest all that, whether it's through a presentation or not, before we evaluate our changes to the housing guidelines. So
I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay.
So thanks for the work.
Well, I'll stay in touch. I don't think that that's scheduled for when they're coming up. So Jay and I will just kind of figure out how to stay in touch on that timing, plus how quickly we can move forward on our own guidelines.
Cool.
We sent you that study and the VCAP study within a week. Just
Yeah, and you guys haven't read them both? Seriously?
Have not yet.
Yes, so VCAPS is the other one that you saw. So that's the culmination of really just 8 hours of session, eight or so, with Western water assessment, and really digging in pretty deep to kind of tracking this whole process of what drought and a second track of severe drought would really look like if it continues to play out the way we saw last summer. So I guess any questions once you guys dig into it? The environmental board will be kind of looking at it, digging into it. Some things basically were already rolled into this year's budget just prior to, even before getting the report, that were Jay's takeaways and Eric's takeaways. So it was a huge resource to, I think, come here and, help us refine that kind of thinking and follow some of those tracks. But it's really intended to just be the beginning of that. and to help a community understand their vulnerabilities and move forward on how to be more resilient against those vulnerabilities. So it's definitely worth kind of digging into.
On the climate modeling, which is the beginning of that report, which was done by Jeff Lucas out of Boulder, is exceptional. It's the best data I think you ever see specific to our valley, and both temperature change and impacts. And going back, way back in terms of tree ring data, 400 plus years back, it's probably the most comprehensive, detailed analysis of what's coming our way based on really good science. That was posted on our website today, and I would encourage the public, to go to that. If you don't make it through the whole report, that particular piece is really enlightening on what we're going to be dealing with in Carbondale and the balance of the Roaring Fork Valley.
All right.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
What's the plan with public presentations of that information? Like, I'm thinking that our community in particular would probably really enjoy a presentation of that and really engage in it, even if it wasn't at a formal Board of Trustees meeting like at the 3rd Street Center or somewhere like that. But that kind of localized data, climate modeling.
We talked about some action items out of the workshop. Yeah.
Yeah, that group I don't think we have as a resource coming back under the current arrangements. So I think we'd be working with the e-board, excuse me, and staff to kind of look at what kind of public rollout would be best with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
There were a couple of bullet points in there around action items, so I think we should, look at those in particular and maybe even make that part of a discussion as a group. Because there were a number of different ways, right? There were some business impacts, right? What does the fishing industry need to be thinking about? And so utilizing the chamber as a resource to kind of target certain groups. There was, an action item around gathering more professionals, landscape professionals, to be thinking about resilience in the landscape and the cultivated environment, right? And so it could be that it's really more bite it off in smaller pieces, but then there was the idea of articles and things like that. The report itself is on the website and was right from the beginning crafted to go to the public and not, shy away from the issues that might be facing us. So I think that we should figure out how to communicate that for sure.
I can probably bring back some enhancements after February 8th, which is the next Colorado Water District Water Forum, which Mark O'Meara generally attends with me. We'll be having a pretty in-depth discussion by many stakeholders, including the water engineer and others from up and down the valley, to specifically discuss the drought impacts and what we should be preparing for going forward for the valley as far as the drought conditions and so forth. So there'll be a pretty scientific and hands-on approach to what is actually going to happen here within the Roaring Fork Valley. So I can bring that back after the February 8th meeting.
And you may want to send them this VCAPS report. It won't be, earth-shattering to them, but it was really fascinating to see how many unique threads the group came up with. Really, almost what you'd consider ancillary impacts that I think some of those boards don't necessarily see or think about, and so it might just be food for thought, and then vice versa, bring some of that information
No, I
back.
think that would be really helpful because the Public Health Department is on that committee, as well as all of the agencies that represent the environment. And then in addition to that, I'm also on the Public Lands and Natural Resources Garfield County Commission, which hasn't met again yet. I think I mentioned that last fall. So they gathered all the information. I'm not exactly sure what the roll-up is going to be, but there's going to be a report back to us who provided the information. So all this has to do with the environmental impact that I'm sure will dovetail into what you're doing and all of the other initiatives that are ongoing within the valley. And then, secondarily, on Friday, there is a Crystal River Management Workshop going on at the Roaring Fork Conservancy from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. I sit on that thing as well as a representative of the fishing community as a river user. And so we'll see what kind of impacts they talk about. It's going to be mainly about the Crystal River, as we've heard about over the last couple of years. But still in all, the total environment is going to impact how that is addressed. So lots going on.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Sure.
Heather, just to Ben's point, maybe I was thinking Wilderness Workshop, RMI, or Roaring Fork Conservancy may want to have this as part of their speaker series or have the authors come back or something. So just an idea.
Yeah, a lot of stakeholders, I think, that are going to be interested in. The e-board wants to share, you know, they're kind of beginning this sort of regional look of different e-boards getting together, so they wanted to share that as well, because you'll see also just so many of those threads are not just about Carbondale in particular, but really have an overall, you know, you pull one and all the strings kind of come together. One last quick one. I have some homework that I've been remiss in getting you guys for the e-board around plastics in the environment and some of your sort of individual stances on different thoughts of what we might or might not move forward on a town basis. So I told them I'd do a little bit of homework, so keep an eye out for an email from me, and just doesn't have to be anything pretty, just kind of brain dump some thoughts for me if you could.
Thank you, Heather. Any other comments? Tarn?
Nothing from me.
Nothing from Tarn. All right. Moving on to item number 6, special event liquor license for the Mount Sopris Recreation Riders. Eric, are you here? How you doing, Eric?
Hi, good, how are you?
I'm doing well. So I'm pretty sure you've been here before for this,
Yeah,
so you know the
times.
drill. Anything we need to know about this?
Just the general rundown. We're having it February 9th at the Orchard, 6 to 10 or 6 to 9. And we'd love to have everyone come.
All right. And would they just show up, or do they buy tickets in advance?
Yeah, we're trying to actually sell tickets in advance, though we are selling them at the door as well.
Okay. And where would they go if they wanted to buy them in advance? Since you're on air and you can.
We, through our website, or through our email address, we're going to try to update our website, but we're just getting our SVPs, and then it'll be tickets at the door.
Okay. Kathy, any questions or any concerns? No. All right. Any questions of Eric? Marty, who usually grills everybody's not here, so you're getting off.
Shoot.
I would move to approve the liquor license for Mount Sopris recreational riders for February 9th at the Orchard.
Second.
Motion by Erica, seconded by Lonnie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. All right. Good luck with the event.
Thank you for your time.
You betcha. All right. Item number 7, CLEER update, 2018 Carbondale specific energy projects. Maisa, Catherine, Alice, and Erica.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
As everybody knows, I work at CLEER, so I'm going to recuse myself, and I'll be out in the lobby.
Okay.
We'll fall asleep.
And Catherine, do you need us to turn on the TV?
After I'm done with the summary?
I think Maisa's going to speak
Okay.
first, and then we'll do that.
All right.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council members. Thanks for having us. I'm Maisa Metcalf, Residential Program Manager at CLEER, and I'm here with Catherine Rushton. She's our Renewable Energy Program Director. Did I get that right? And in your packet, you probably received the detailed report for the work completed in 2018. So I thought I would just go over some highlights and answer any questions as they come up.
Okay.
That's okay. So we had the income qualified program this year. We completed 9 income qualified projects in town of Carbondale. One more is in the final stage. So that one should be done in a couple of months. There was over $50,000 invested in those projects. And I just want to mention that none of the money that Town of Carbondale allocated for measures was actually spent because we were able to leverage so much from Energy Outreach Colorado and participating utilities. It's been amazing the amount of support we have been receiving from everybody who participates in this program. So we just want to thank the Town of Carbondale because thanks to the money you've put in toward this program, we were able to expand, and now CARE is being offered in over 40 counties across the state since 2015 when we started this pilot program in Garfield County. So it's been wonderful. And I just want to mention that we're still doing a lot of outreach door-to-door in different communities, reaching out to multifamily properties, trailer parks, and still working with a lot of assistance agencies like Lift Up, Roaring Fork Resource Center, which works with the Roaring Fork School District. So we're going to continue doing that in Town of Carbondale through Garfield Clean Energy probably next year. Okay. Business efficiency campaign. We Our staff designed and ran 4 different ads in the Sopris and also in the new Carbondale magazine. And we also went door to door in town of Carbondale talking to businesses about the benefits of upgrading the business and investing in energy efficiency, reducing their utility bills. 6 businesses participated in 2018, saving over $4,000 in energy bills and invested over $30,000 in projects. So those projects went to, local contractors and folks doing this work every day. I just want to mention the amount leveraged in the business campaign was $11,000, which means those businesses were able to get rebates from utilities and from CORE as well, and CLEER was able to help them move these projects forward. And the ads looked great. I don't know if you guys saw in the report, there were only 2, but we revamped the 4 we had last year in 2017, and they looked really nice. We heard really great comments from the Chamber of Commerce and some local businesses as well. Educational programs.
Maisa, before you move on to educational, sorry to interrupt, but for both residential and businesses, how do you feel like they met your expectations, the results?
The income qualified, we're actually hoping for more because we know of some people that actually need the help and they don't apply, either because they're tenants and they don't want to reach out to their homeowner to ask for permission because they do have to sign a waiver.
Okay.
So we know of a lot of families, which breaks my heart. We go to their homes and we know they need help, but they don't want to go to their landlord and say, I need help. Can you please sign this waiver? So although the numbers are good compared to other communities, like Newcastle, we only did 3, and we know more people need help. So 9 homes was an okay number, but we know more people need help, and we're going to continue this program because we know of that.
Okay.
Now, in terms of businesses, I think because of the price of LED went down so much, so many businesses are just doing upgrades but not really reaching out to us because they feel like the rebate's not really necessary. They're doing because they see the advantage.
Mm-hmm.
But the business campaign is great to highlight the businesses in town of Carbondale that have done something and to just show, okay, you want to be part of this community that are doing something to help Carbondale become carbon neutral. So I think 6 is a good number compared to like how much we had for that line item. I think it was only $4,000.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a little bit. So.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Educational programs. We organized several different workshops and educational events talking about sustainability topics. There were a total of 9 events in 2018. Total attendees were 400. And we leveraged about 6,000 in different sponsorships or folks that helped us purchase refreshments for the different events. And just to mention some of the topics we covered, we had speakers talk about affordable, net zero affordable housing, passive house design, solar PV for homes, and we had a great session on radon mitigation in partnership with Garfield County Health Department. Was very well attended. One session we had on waste diversion. People had so many questions what they could do more to reduce their plastic usage, that kind of stuff. For next year, we would love to continue with this educational program because we think it was very successful and talk about how we can address drought and water issues in our valley. I think that could be a great topic for us to cover this year, 2019. Last one, we have the Carbondale climate-friendly transportation. What we proposed in 2018 was to help Town of Carbondale apply for the Colorado Energy Office Charge Ahead grant. We did submit the grant proposal, but unfortunately it did not get approved because of the competition. There were so many different communities reaching out to them. We do think there was opportunity to try again in 2019, and I believe Mesh Migalski is in touch with city staff talking about how much it would actually cost to do it. But we think there was definitely great opportunity to make the fast charging station happen in town this year. Now I'm going to hand it off to Catherine Rushton. She's going to talk about the Zero Energy District report.
All right.
All right. Hello, technology. Yes. Oh, here we go.
I think we'll need to turn the screen on again.
Okay, we're on. I don't.
This one's off. All right.
It's amazing in 2019, we all still have that feeling of anticipation. Is it going to work?
Let's close it out and bring it up again and see if that works.
All right.
How about now? That work?
Can you see it?
Yeah? Okay, great. So yeah, I'm going to give you a more in-depth report on the Carbondale Net Zero Energy District project. And so I want to start with just really connecting it to why we were looking at a net zero energy district. Obviously, the 2017 Carbondale Climate and Energy Action Plan had certain targets, but ultimately, is trying to achieve 100% reduction of carbon emissions by 2050. And so in that plan, zero energy districts were identified as one of the means of working towards that goal. And so the scope of the project included several things: providing education on the net zero energy concept, identifying a suitable location in Carbondale, doing some outreach to stakeholders, and then recognizing what the opportunities are and also identifying any potential barriers. And so May of 2018, CLEER held a very well-attended educational workshop, Buildings for a Sustainable Future symposium. And we had national experts presenting, Shanti Pless from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and also Ed Mazria. And so in this session, the audience really learned about the zero energy concept, which is basically that on-site renewable energy produces the same amount of energy or more energy than is being used on the site. And so the net zero energy district kind of just expands that concept from one building to a collection of buildings, with the idea that there may be some advantages to looking at a district approach. And those advantages could be potentially cost savings from economies of scale, or the ability to use, a roof or land in one area to provide energy to a building in another area. But just the idea of integrating energy needs and supply across a district can increase resiliency. And so during the workshop session, there was a mini charrette that identified a potential project boundary. And the reason this particular location was identified was because it has key characteristics. So there's a variety of property types. There's commercial property types, but also some new affordable housing units and some older lower income housing units. There was already existing solar PV on site, so it wouldn't completely start from scratch. And then some of the owners have already expressed interest in high-performance buildings, and it's also a very central location that has a high public use. And so this shows you the district boundary, and it's kind of centered around South 3rd Street, incorporates some of 2nd Street and a little bit of Sopris Avenue. And so the key buildings in the district include the Carbondale Branch Library, the Bridges High School, the new Roaring Fork School District housing, the 3rd Street Center, and then it also included a strip of townhomes along 2nd Street. And so that was included to really help see if we could maybe help reduce utility costs for some of the town's older and lower income housing in this district concept. The middle map kind of shows you the ownership of these parcels, and then we also have identified where there's already existing solar PV in the district. And so, the methodical approach to the project really started with doing some outreach to all the stakeholders and the building owners. And it's important to note that the data collection and then the analysis work really represents probably the largest portion of the hours spent on this project. There's lots of different sources that the data came from, and some of them are really pretty accurate, such as billing histories or data from buildings that are already being measured or monitored. And then there's also a fair bit of data gaps that were identified, and so some of the data has been estimated or it's been extrapolated from incomplete data sets. But with this work, we were able to at least build a picture of like the baseline energy use within the district. And so what you can see here is that the chart showing, you know, the use of electricity, that not all of it's coming from the grid. There's actually quite a bit being produced by solar already. And then also that gas consumption is a much larger piece of the pie than electricity consumption.
What's the unit there? Like, how are you comparing gas consumption to the others? Is that by carbon emissions, or is that by...
No. So it's actually, the unit is kilowatt hours, and then with gas, the unit is BTUs. And so I think that both were then converted to BTUs, and then compared. Yeah. And so, you know, tackling the current electricity use of these facilities seems fairly straightforward. We're already using solar PV. Potentially, you know, another 200 kW of solar PV would produce all the electricity that's being used in all these buildings in the district. But it's also pretty obvious that gas consumption is a much larger and potentially tougher nut to crack in this net zero effort. So the report that we provide in your packet really details out a lot of the measures to date that each building has taken, and also just the opportunities for each building to implement new technologies to get to net zero. And so I don't want to detail all of those right now. But many of the buildings in the districts have already made significant progress to mitigate electricity-based carbon emissions, partly with solar, but also with energy efficiency. And so for each building, we kind of looked at, like, what are their further opportunities. And so some highlights. At the 3rd Street Center, they're actually already engaging in a feasibility study to look at ground source heat pump technology that could potentially go under the new parking area. And so we did some work toward looking at, well, could this be a centralized project that could provide heating and cooling to many buildings in the district, and are there opportunities for cost savings there? And we haven't really finished that analysis, so it's not yet clear as whether that should be the way forward. We also have looked at air source heat pumps. They really have some new technology now that makes air source heat pumps more viable in our region. It used to be that once you drop below 0 degrees that they really didn't function anymore, but now they have this variable compressor technology that means that you can use them under 0 degrees. And so we really need to do more work to kind of compare ground source against air source. Ground source could be a larger centralized approach, and air source is more of a modular approach, and it's very efficient, but not quite as efficient as ground source, but also maybe a lot more cost effective because the upfront cost is a fair bit less. But both of those technologies can provide heating and cooling without using gas. And pretty much all the buildings right now are using gas for their heating and cooling systems. And so they would be powered by electricity, and then you would look at how much solar PV would you need to then offset that additional electric use to get to net zero. So at the Carbondale Library, they already have existing PV. We did look at how much more they could put on their roof, and they could potentially get to 100% of their current consumption by putting more PV on the roof. The Roaring Fork School District have actually entered into a long-term contract to purchase solar from a community solar garden. And so they could look at additional efficiency measures to get to a net zero strategy for the heating and cooling, but that's all still to be determined. And then they, all of the units at the housing for the Roaring Fork School District are solar ready, and the district are now doing a feasibility study for rooftop solar PV. We also identified potential there to kind of centralize the approach to the heating and cooling, either using solar thermal technology or maybe the ground source heat pump technology. And then the Second Street townhomes, we think one of the main opportunities here is really to enroll all of the homeowners in the CARE program that Maisa was talking about, or get them an energy assessment to identify efficiency measures that could be taken. You can see that the vast majority of the energy use there is gas consumption. And so we did an analysis on what it would take to convert all of their gas-based heat systems to high-efficiency electric air source heat pumps. We figured out it cost about $20,000 per unit. So for 20 units, that would be a $400,000 project. But maybe, there's an opportunity to look at this lower-income housing and think about, could we do a project where we looked at it as a whole and look at, can we do 20 6 kW PV systems, and is there a possibility to do an economies of scale with a group purchase program, or is there a way to do the air source heat pumps and maybe look at a grant opportunity. So there's definitely opportunities there. So that's kind of like the high-level overview of the opportunities at each building. And then there were definitely some particular barriers that we came up against. The one thing I quickly understood was that most of the best practices around net zero district development are based on new construction projects, and that it really makes a lot more sense to create a net zero master plan in the pre-design phase, so that the project has an energy budget and then you build all the systems to the budget. Obviously, we're talking about a retrofit situation, and so having to do this conversion of these gas-based systems to electricity is really pretty costly. So that's something to consider. And then something else to think about is, we do have a lot of land or rooftop space, but current PUC and utility rules prevent the possibility of, for example, building a large solar array near 3rd Street to then power buildings on a completely differently owned parcel, say at the townhomes or one of the other buildings. So looking for economies of scale that way, where you have one centralized system, may not work, but there are opportunities for economies of scale. So, for example, we could, maybe look at aggregated procurement of systems. So, if we could maybe develop several projects at once with the district building owners, and then they put out one RFP for all the systems and purchase all the systems in bulk, there could be some savings that way. So then in terms of the recommendations based on what we've learned so far, and this is definitely a work in progress, there's obviously a lot of details, and so we probably want to focus on just really taking the step-by-step approach, maybe prioritize a list of measures, thinking about what is possible in the current climate with current funding sources and current technologies. And then I think it would make sense to really convene a meeting among the district stakeholders, because I think there's opportunity for further education on the concept of what the net zero opportunities are and what the technologies are and what particular measures each building could take. We do need to address the gaps in the data. And one way to do that is to implement more comprehensive measuring of energy consumption beyond what's already happening. And then, and just really to gain more commitment and buy-in. And then, maybe look at this aggregated procurement concept. And then we really need to kind of follow up on connecting the financing and funding mechanisms that were detailed in the report and connecting those to specific measures that could happen within the district. And I think that, going back to this, it's a retrofit situation. I do think the town has an opportunity to encourage net zero design for new construction. And this kind of brings us back to the beginning, which is the 2017 Energy Action Climate Plan. If we're going to reach that target, then new construction is an easier way to go, because we could use codes, policies, education, incentives to try and encourage net zero design. So that's kind of the report in a nutshell, but I'm happy to answer specific questions.
Thanks, Catherine. Questions of Catherine? I have a few. And I assume it's for Maisa too.
Yeah.
All right. I might work backwards. Catherine, tell me, do you see the goal of the Zero Energy District as achieving net zero, or is it more to learn how we could apply those strategies town-wide?
I think the project, I think maybe both. And I think that the value of this project is really in the lessons learned so far and, things that we can do now to move towards a goal. I think that we should maybe not feel put off or overwhelmed by the enormity of the project and accept that there may be pieces that we can't quite solve right now, either because there's not the right technology or funding mechanism or whatever. But now that we've kind of established a baseline, how do we move towards the goal? And in doing so, maybe then these ideas can be replicated or lessons learned can be distributed.
Okay. Do you think, now that you've done this homework, I've liked the idea of the experimentation aspect of a net zero energy district, but now that you've explored a little more, do you feel like this is a priority in terms of achieving our goal?
Which goal?
Yeah, carbon neutrality. Is this the way to do it or not?
I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think, the Climate Action Plan probably outlines several ways, and I think all of these things need to be happening in tandem. And working out how to get to net zero energy and doing a project like this where we keep, moving forward and chipping away and going, okay, well, we figured out that it doesn't make sense to do a large ground source heat pump, but it does make sense to do these other things, is going to be worthy over time to reach the goal.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to keep going on this. One more question around that. We as Sendigo are under contract to buy a property, and there isn't natural gas to the site. And my old school line of thinking is, oh, great, we can help the neighbors by bringing gas to the site. And I was like, wait a minute, no, that's so 20 years ago.
It's only 10 years ago.
Right. So
things are moving quickly.
Right. But have you given thought about where we should be directing our focus in terms of gas? Should we create large disincentives for not having gas-fired equipment, or where are we with that? Clearly, the numbers you quoted shows that retrofitting it is kind of cost prohibitive, if you ask me. But what about for new construction and gas from that standpoint?
Yeah, I think that we'll just go back to the whole electrification piece. That's a real shift in thinking, isn't it? Because we've been so focused on highly efficient, gas boilers and that kind of thing. And so if we're going to get to, net zero emissions, we're really looking at electrifying all of our systems. And so does it make sense to focus on a district where there's a lot of gas-fired equipment? No, maybe we should be identifying projects in Carbondale that actually are already electric heat, whether that's, and that could be really great if we could find a low-income housing situation where people are using electric heat that's super inefficient, because then I think, the idea of beneficial electrification and you changing those systems to, for example, air source heat pumps that are way more efficient, still using electricity, so not this massive conversion. There's a real opportunity, and that's probably something I've realized in doing this homework. I'm not sure that answered the question.
Well, let me
What was
ask a
the
more pointed question. You know, sounds like there is talk about, you know, addressing this in a code manner. Would it be your recommendation that that code either prohibit natural gas or create strong incentives not to have gas-fired equipment?
I think certainly for new construction.
Yes, that's what I'm
talking about. I think for new construction that it makes sense to really push for, you know, electric-based systems because that is definitely the most cost-effective way to get to net zero, because then you can use on-site renewables.
Okay.
So yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I might just pick up on that. My question about sort of the unit there wasn't to, you know, get into a detail or anything. It was just, I'm really wondering if we looked at the carbon emissions, which is our main focus, right, with getting to net zero, like that's the real goal, what that graph would look like. Like what percentage of the carbon is really coming from natural gas? Because my understanding is that within the range of fossil fuels, it's a lower carbon one, but I know it obviously still has an impact.
You know, and I think that's work yet to be done. You know, the scope of the contract and the funds were fairly limited.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we tried to give you as much as we could within the limitations. And so that's why we're kind of saying this is like a work in progress. You know, this is what we know so far. That analysis could certainly be useful.
I'm just wondering if, like the cost-benefit analysis of it sounds like eliminating gas completely is, for now, a really distant, very hard to achieve goal. And I just wonder how much emissions that portion of our energy use is accounting for, and how hard we should work at that part. Because like when you look at those graphs, it's like, oh my God, like we got to chip away at that. But I'd be curious where we'd be if we got everything else carbon neutral and we still had natural gas firing our boilers, you know? What reduction in emissions we would have achieved at that point.
Well, we did talk about it last year when we were kind of laying out our priorities for the climate action plan. And does it make sense to just focus on dollar per tons or dollar per pounds? And, you know, regardless of what it is, find the most cost-effective way to reduce emissions. So we ultimately said, you know, it's not all that. That's why we have the low-income program and things. But, I mean, that could be the way we look at it.
Yeah.
I have one thing. You know, I was listening to your presentation here in terms of all the scientific evidence presented in the value of going net zero, but I didn't hear anything about how you would propose to gain property owner buy-in, whether that's the developer or the home or the business owner. There's a big social aspect to that doesn't seem to have been addressed in any of this data. So in terms that they would care about, perhaps in cost savings or, you know, the limited inconvenience in doing this, or how would that impact their scope of business and their ability to use their home as an example. Have you given any thought to building that into this pro forma as to how to transfer all this stuff over?
I don't think that we've really taken that step yet, and that is what we could probably do as one of the next steps with this project. We've really only focused on what's going on within this district, and so in terms of who are those property owners and how we engage them, I think that we have, you know, we've definitely considered that and done some of that engagement and made some recommendations on how to move forward with this net zero district. And, you know, I think what you're proposing, it takes it the next step is then how do you translate that to the wider community, and that is work yet to be done.
Thank you.
Have you given any thought to a district heating system? Are we ever going to see that in Carbondale? Or?
I mean, I think that that's one of the opportunities potentially at the Roaring Fork School District housing. And I do believe that, the district did their best to build those units to the highest efficiency they could based on their budget. But to a certain extent, it was new construction and there was some missed opportunities there, because I do think that that would be an ideal place to have had a centralized approach to heating. And instead of putting a boiler unit in every single one of those units, we could have had a centralized, storage and maybe generated it through solar thermal or, some other means. So,
but I guess that's my question. But it wasn't chosen. Maybe they didn't consider it.
But was it even considered? I'm not sure that it was ever even on the table in the design process. And so I guess the point about the real opportunity is in new construction and pre-design is that when a new construction project comes to the town of Carbondale, here's what we want to do, is to at least get all of these opportunities on their radar so that these things are considered before moving forward with a development plan. And I think a big part of that is really educating developers on not just looking at upfront capital costs to do the development, but also operating costs over time.
Okay. Maisa, I really appreciated the summary before each program that gave me a quick snapshot of the metrics, so thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
You mentioned for the educational campaign in 2019 focusing on drought.
Well, water issues, you guys were talking about the assessment done.
Just including that as one.
Just including that as one of the topics we would like to focus on in 2019.
Seems like that's a little out of your core competency. I mean, I shouldn't say core competency, but your mission, I suppose. So I just kind of question that, because you have other organizations working on water. But that was I was surprised to hear that.
Can I just amend that a tiny bit? Not so much drought as the overall problem, but just water efficiency, resource efficiency.
Exactly.
Yeah. So incorporating that into the energy water education component as much as it fits within our mission, and being really aware that there are the other organizations working on the overall topic, but when we're talking about resource efficiency, including it there.
Okay.
Yeah, always partner with other organizations too.
Yeah.
Then do more outreach and get more attendees.
It's just a harder sell for me. Like, there's the message of drought, which I think kind of falls into the VCAP discussion. But when it comes to water efficiency, I just don't know if we're there yet to make that sell. I hate to say it, but we're just not there. So I just question the cost benefit of that. But so my last question, you want to speak to that?
Just to stay on that for a second, I guess one of the threads that came out of the VCAPs that I think is pulled is maybe flipping that around a little bit is that under certain drought scenarios, we increase fire risk, etc. Just last summer, the vulnerabilities of this entire valley because of, single connection to grid sources was really revealed in all its great firepower. So I think to a certain extent, thinking about some of the vulnerabilities that came up and the diversification of the grid and, closer sort of site power, whether it's in emergency scenarios or whether it's just the direction that we're moving, is something that it would be great to see kind of in your court from a leadership perspective. So that's not necessarily in lieu of efficiency of water resource, but also a piece of drought that the two are really tied together. And, that was a big eye-opening for the whole valley. But then as we kind of played that out even more so as a group in the vulnerabilities workshop, it really became apparent, right? The weaknesses in the grid and things like that. So power and water, as it relates to resiliency, are pretty tied together. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And with climate change, it's only going to become worse and more evident that drought's going to, be present in our lives. So we could have a little session on how you can make a difference by conserving water or
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with Dan from the perspective of there's a lot of people doing that.
That is true.
Right? But more really working on what the vulnerabilities are in the grid. And when we can't serve water to the community because we've been cut off from our major power source in the valley, like, that's the issue when you really play it out in the long term. So
We're extremely vulnerable.
yeah, so I agree with Dan from the perspective of be careful not to move in that direction without, like, making sure that there's not somebody already doing that with, the right resources and whatnot. But there are other pieces where water and energy, I think, cross really tightly. And there aren't necessarily a lot of people trying to kind of play out those scenarios.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, the groups that I sit on, we don't discuss water delivery at all. It's water availability and water conservation, but not necessarily water delivery to the public, except for ag. That's a different quadrant. But anyway, good, thanks.
So one of the things I thought we could do is if we have any guidance, we're not going to get into the details of what the priorities are for 2019, but any guidance to CLEER on any thoughts we have. And for me, to me, that district heating system, it's been sort of that dream for me of, gosh, wouldn't that be great that we could deliver heating and cooling with a central plant that is 100% renewable. But it still seems out there, maybe not cost effective. But to me, when I think about the programs, Joe Stebrook used to say it's easier to save 70% than it is 20%. And so we've got programs that are kind of designed to focus on that 20%. Is it time to take the big bite out of the apple and say, no, if we're really going to achieve these goals, we need something more aggressive than the programs that we've had in the past? And so we're not going to figure that out tonight, but I would just challenge you to really think, and I don't mean to belittle the work by saying business as usual, but is the business as usual programs really where we want to be in 2019? Or do we need to think outside the box and really embrace something bigger? The Net Zero Energy District might be that, but I think it's even beyond what you've presented. So that would be my comment, is I'm ready for if we're going to invest, let's invest. Maybe we don't even look for what kind of emissions reductions. Maybe that's not our goal. Our goal is to move the needle on some larger action. Because we know we're little old Carbondale. We're not going to reduce enough emissions to change the world. But some other.
But at the same time,
I would like
adding to the momentum.
Yeah, I would like to counter
so
that.
Much going on right now.
Yes, everybody has to make that contribution, right? So little old Carbondale has to do everything it can to reduce emissions along with the rest of the world. Otherwise, if we don't all do it together, we're not going to save the world, are we? So I think there's a danger in thinking that maybe, the utility companies will take care of the problem because they've set these aggressive targets. They can't reach those targets without the collaboration and the partnership with towns like Carbondale, and so I think that's a serious consideration. And then, with the Net Zero Energy District, maybe the goal isn't to figure out how to get that particular site to net zero, but I do think there's some value in still pursuing some of the ideas that came out of that and figuring out and actually just getting to the end of the analysis, because I feel like it's incomplete right now, because otherwise we can't really translate lessons learned. And I do think there's a whole connection to the resiliency piece that Heather was talking about. Things are moving quickly, and this didn't get into the report, but we're already talking to 3rd Street Center about how they can become the emergency shelter and put in some backup power. They're already producing more solar PV than they use, and so maybe that way we could have a place where if things do get difficult or we do have some catastrophic event, if we have backup power, we can keep the heat on for the gas boilers, because they all need electricity for the pumps to work. And so I feel like there are a lot of opportunities in that net zero study that aren't necessarily this, hey, should we do district heat? I do think air source heat pumps are a very exciting opportunity, and I'd really like to see some pilot projects happen so we can assess if that's going to be the way forward with beneficial electrification. And I would really like to finish the analysis on ground source heat to see, is that even viable or is it just not cost effective?
Right. Alice?
I just wanted to follow up on that, but also try to respond directly to what you'd asked about, are we doing enough, and is it big picture enough? And I'd say we're not. Whatever ideas people have for how we could move forward faster. I mean, the net zero thing is is an important concept, but we would welcome ideas for how do we move faster. It's frustratingly slow. 2020 is right around the corner, and that was the original target date for a lot of targets. So I just want to make sure we're conveying that we're not satisfied with this kind of piecemeal approach. And if you have ideas on what should happen, we'd love to incorporate that. I also want to point out that this project and what we talked about today is the Carbondale scope that complements the Garfield Clean Energy scope, which is moving at a much bigger scale. And that also, we had a corridor network meeting in December that Heather was at that talks about a 3-county approach and really accelerating investment of renewable energy. So this is one piece where we're able to focus on some innovations that then ripple out, but it's within the context of Garfield Clean Energy and then this corridor initiative. But I really want to zero in on what I think your question was. Do we want to do the same approach in 2019? We'd love to do something, that's larger scale, moves the needle faster. We'd love your ideas on that.
Yeah, so I think what I would just ask the board kind of in closing is, like, the low income and the business programs are kind of state of the shelf, right? We know those, they're tried and true. You just do these things and you'll save energy. There's cutting edge and then there's bleeding edge. And maybe the bleeding edge is what you're talking about, Alice. What's the big, bold action? Where do we want to be? I mean, we have a set limit of funds, so, we're not going to reinvent something. But where do we want to be? Bleeding edge, state of the shelf, or somewhere in between? I personally feel like I'm willing to go to that bleeding edge and say, let's be really innovative with the dollars we spend, even though it may compromise some low-income programs, or maybe not.
And in all honesty, when we analyze the CARE program, we're leveraging so much from the utilities and from EOC that we think it'll be okay for the town of Carbondale to say, okay, let's put this money towards something else, because we're doing okay without the contribution from the town of Carbondale.
And if you're not, I don't want to put you on the spot if you don't feel like you need to respond, but I just thought it might be good to provide some feedback, so.
Well, it seems to me the biggest opportunity from what I've heard from both of you is that the new developments have the biggest opportunity. So it would be beneficial and highly visible for Carbondale to have those developers convinced that this is the way to go. So if that's something that can be done, that's sort of cutting edge, bleeding edge all at the same time, and would maybe pull the rest of the market forward if there were some high visibility examples that can be set given those. And I'm thinking of some of the developments that we've had under discussion for the last 6 months as an example.
I think because we do have a limited budget, we're talking about $30,000, we were thinking about focusing on 3 main areas. One would be transportation. So we would, again, try the Charge Ahead grant and see if we can get a fast charging station in town of Carbondale, which would really benefit downtown. We'd get a lot more traffic, people stopping by, spending money in downtown shops. The rest would then go toward educational programs, and we would do sessions on air source heat pumps and really educate the public on the different technologies, different things they can do to make a difference, and then continuing to develop the zero energy district concept in any way possible.
But how do those 3 then come to fruition? I mean, what do we see from those 3 rather than having a new building go up that actually has the net zero resources in place? How much would it cost you to convince a developer as an example, to go that route rather than spend the money on these other three things that we really don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Well, I think it's important to know there's some parallel efforts outside of this going on to kind of shoot for that goal. And the board rewriting some of our energy codes and some of the stuff going on to kind of try to push that would be in conjunction with this, but it's a different focus.
I see.
We have some consulting dollars set aside to kind of rewrite our energy codes. The e-board would like to push it all the way to the bleeding edge, as using Dan's word. I'm not sure if the development community is going to support the bleeding edge or the cutting edge side, and that's going to be a discussion for the public process as we go through that. So I think that's kind of a parallel effort to what CLEER is working on. It's not that it can't be rolled together and have some support from CLEER, but there's a whole other town effort going on that front.
Very well put.
Because I think the challenge would be the scope, right? If you said, here's this project, and what would it take for this project to then be, fully net zero, like that delta for a developer is significantly more than $30,000. So while I appreciate the idea of, cutting edge or bleeding edge, I don't think $30,000 gets you a pilot project. But the idea of education, if there's resources for that $30,000 that puts a developer in touch with larger grant money that could actually make them a pilot project and fill that delta gap, then you're, digging where there's potatoes. But I think until then, it's just, I don't think this is the scale of money that gets us a bleeding edge project. So either we decide to create that delta, fill that delta, or the piece about making these connections, right? Because right now, if we were to jump to energy codes and building codes that are net zero, we don't have there's a sliver of amazing designers and architects that can get there like that, but the vast majority, there's a huge learning curve. And then put that on top of contractors. Again, a sliver that can get you there, but the vast majority is a huge learning curve, and that's what puts the additional costs onto projects, developers, and everybody else. So, and ultimately buyers. So I think that gap has to be filled, even if it is incremental, right? Because look how better our energy codes are now from what they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. So I believe in incremental changes. It's just hard to feel like you're making that big of a difference, but I really think that it is. I think some of that educational money spent kind of tied to this discussion that's happening with the e-board around frankly, some of our own internal training and then training of the building community, especially, would be huge. Because if that fear factor goes away, that's where the costs start coming down. Right now, there's just an unknown factor from the development and the building community that until we can chip away at that, someone just says, well, you just added 25% to my project.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it in Carbondale. Or I'm going to do it and the costs are passed on to homeowners and buyers or renters or,
There goes your AMI.
Exactly.
Yeah. Got it.
So, yeah, I don't know. It was not definitive, but just my thoughts.
Well, and to be clear, Jay, I'm not suggesting that we require the bleeding edge of developers, but
I wasn't trying.
But the e-board is. He's,
right.
He's definitely sharing where some of the
board, what you're going to hear
and the debate, at that level. So you have to be careful when you throw a bleeding edge out there.
But and we need to wind down because we're over, and I start twitching when we go over. But I would say that for me personally, I would much rather the efforts this year, next year, focus on that long-term goal of carbon neutrality rather than the short-term goal of emission reductions on an annual basis, because I do think they're not necessarily one and the same, if that makes sense. But that's where I am now, so for what it's worth. Closing comments?
We'll talk later because I don't understand how our annual reductions aren't tied to the long-term goal. But, I mean, nothing's been said by anybody here that I really disagree with. And I want to also say I really appreciate this work. Like, this study is fantastic, and I think it's, in a way, it's easier to look at the new development and say, do it right next time. But we've got to get honest with ourselves at some point, right, that we're all running a little fossil fuel power plant in our basement that's contributing to the problem, and then we don't know how to stop doing it. I have no idea how to stop doing that. So I'm really interested in a continuation of that. I'm also really interested in being, more aggressive, right? I mean, everything is saying now we've got 12 years or whatever the, doomsday date is. So it seems like it is time for bold action. I don't know what to suggest. I mean, Alice said, give us some suggestions.
Well, I'm just saying.
I wish I knew.
You realize some of this seems very incremental.
Yeah.
And many people say you have to do that incremental, ongoing change, but we also want to be continually be looking for the deeper changes or things that will trigger deeper changes and not get so comfortable with, we did some income qualified projects.
Right. Yeah. But I do think that this deep look at what does it take to take an existing development and make it retrofitted into carbon neutrality and grapple with all those issues and then have some options on the table for people, and also saying we might get more aggressive with new development in our codes at some point, or really incentivize it in some way. I mean, at some point, it sounds like it will make sense to say we can't add to our carbon footprint with new development, right? At some point, it can't raise us up. We've got to be chipping away at what we've got, and we can't be adding to it on the other side. So I'm definitely interested in that, and I'm interested in what the board comes up with. So,
just to clarify what you asked, Ben, because I think it's important, if we continue at the same pace, and this isn't a criticism, this is just the reality, if we continue at the same pace we've been on, we're not going to get there. At some point, we have to leapfrog and take bold action. So I'm just saying, let's do that sooner rather than later.
Okay.
So, all right. Thank you.
Just one quick clarification. On the charge ahead grant, we're probably going to look at the summer cycle instead of the late winter cycle for a grant application, because in terms of installation, it needs to happen late summer, early fall time frame as opposed to during our peak construction period. There's just too much going on to absorb another project on the public works, and there's some real self-performing to be done on that to get it done for the install. So not that it wouldn't happen, but it's going to be later in the year than earlier.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
So in terms of next steps, are you guys okay with us working with Jay on a scope of services for 2019?
Yep.
Okay, we'll go from there.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll take all your ideas and put it into a $30,000 program.
Yeah.
It'll be bold.
Minus the charge ahead.
It's going to be so bold.
Well, it can be there just later in the year.
All right. Thank you very much. Do you guys want to take a break?
We have to go wake up Erica.
Oh, yeah. Let's take a quick break while she comes back in.
We'll take a 5-minute break.
We run out together.
For item number 8, Wolf Creek Storage Referral. Janet, thanks for sticking around.
Sure, thank you. It was an interesting conversation. So basically, we received a referral from Pitkin County, and they have a land use application in from Rocky Mountain Natural Gas, who's also known now as Black Hills. And their proposal is to drill 2 new gas storage wells in an existing gas storage unit called Wolf Creek Unit. And the Wolf Creek Unit is located in Pitkin County. It's about 9,000 acres, and it's entirely within the White River National Forest. And this unit was developed in 1973, and there are 10 active wells currently. The wells are old. Some were drilled in the 60s, some in the 70s, some in the 80s, and the most recent one was drilled in 1992. And because of the age of the wells, Rocky Mountain Natural Gas would like to build 2 new wells to replace 2 of the existing wells. And this was a kind of a learning curve for me, but basically the gas storage wells, they're not drilling for gas or anything. They're basically storage wells where they use existing utility lines to inject gas into that, and then use other transmission lines to draw the gas out to serve the Roaring Fork Valley. So basically it looks like the main impact to the town would be the vehicle trips through the town, and that's to haul the drilling rig. The bulk of the truck traffic will go through Glenwood Springs, but the 27th Street Bridge can't support the, what do they call it, the drilling rig. And so what would happen is, what they would like to do is have a convoy of about 25 vehicles to bring the drilling rig up into the site. That drilling rig would drill both wells and then return back through town. The caravan would travel from 82 along 133, take a right on Main Street, and then the pad is quite a ways away. They would actually then travel over Dry Park. It looks like then go up 4 Mile and then southwest to Sunlight Peak. So it's a long haul for them. The convoy would go through town about 4 or 5 in the morning. I've talked to them about coordinating with the police department, make sure that they know that they're coming through town. And I have let the police department and Public Works know about this. And, you know, I've let them know also about the construction going on at the city market site. I did ask them for some additional information on the size and the weight of the trucks. And they said basically there'd be 22 oversized loads. The heaviest load would be 2 mud pumps at 110,000 pounds. And the largest is about 72 feet long, about 13 feet wide, and 12 feet tall. It sounds like what they do for the next steps, if they get approval from Pitkin County, is that they would have to get permitted by CDOT to travel with this type of equipment on the highways. And that's where a lot of the details are figured out as far as the loads. And so we wanted to bring this to you, let you know that it's number one going on. See if you have comments and concerns. Kevin is here. Kevin, in his previous life, he's worked at Kansas KDOT, and is pretty well aware of the permitting process, at least in that state. So mainly informational for you, but also if you have concerns or thoughts or questions, I'd be happy to answer any best I can.
Questions? Comments? Mine?
Are then 22 of the 24 rigs oversized? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, it says there'll be 22 oversized loads.
Okay, and that's going to compose the convoy that's going through.
Right.
So we're going to have basically a train of great big rigs coming through between 4 and 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once.
Once, and then on the
twice.
return.
Once,
yeah. And what's the time frame between? Do they have a sense of?
Oh, they did. It's been a while since I read it. It was months. Yeah, literally months. So it seemed like it was going to start in June and finish up in October. I'm going from memory there, but it was a month's time frame. It takes a long time to drill them.
And then are the bobtail or the empty trucks coming back without the gear?
Or do they leave the rigs up there?
The majority of the gear comes back. It's the drilling rig and stuff. There's maybe some apparatus left up there, but
What she's saying was when the trucks drop the rig off,
yeah.
Do the empty trucks
Do the
come
empties
back?
come back down?
Oh, the empties at that point. I don't know if they clarified that or not, whether the tractors come back down. I would assume a portion of them do at least.
Yeah.
I'm sure they will.
That's a good question, though.
Just curious.
See if they'll have the same timing, you know.
Or they might go through Gloomwood. Once they drop off their equipment, they'd be under whatever weight restrictions we're keeping them out of Gloomwood. So.
They'll probably just go down 4 Mile. You're right.
So I was, yeah.
I guess the only thing I was going to say is, I mean, in terms of our feedback to Pekin County, is that the things that sort of you talked about with, what was it, Mark? I guess be some definitive, approval standards. What's the word I'm looking for?
Conditions?
Yes, thank you. That was the word. And then the only one I would say to add to that would just be, if there's certain emergency scenarios or they change their mind or something happens to the 27th Street Bridge while it's under construction, that they are required to come back and to us if this transportation pattern is going to change significantly. Because remember that bridge is going to be under construction, so.
Yeah. Because apparently there's a lot of water trucks that go up. They're buying potable water from Rifle.
Wow.
So,
that's
interesting.
Intense.
That means gas is still way too cheap, huh?
Yeah. That's what I figured. Yeah.
So I was fortunate to have a tour of this last fall, and it is pretty interesting. Essentially they're enhancing and upgrading antiquated equipment. And it's amazing to me, there's buildings that are the size of the lobby in here and just filled with pipes that they're going to completely disassemble, store nearby so that they have the room to re-drill the wells, and then they'll reassemble everything. It's mind-boggling to me that they can do that and that it's cost-effective. But it's essentially enabling us to extend the life of our natural gas infrastructure, which sort of informed some of the questions I had before, like, wow, we as a community and consumers of natural gas are about to make a pretty significant investment in the natural gas infrastructure in the future, and is that such a wise idea? We don't really have the ability to say no right now, nor would we really, but it is pretty fascinating. So I think on the surface, I'm comfortable with the project, I think there's impacts from the trucks, but I think it'll be insignificant. I think my question that I would like you to ask in there, Janet, is I didn't think about this when I was on the tour, but I would like some assurance that there's no aspect of increasing production as a result of this project, because I think that's a totally different scope.
Oh, yeah.
And there are some more knowledgeable about the industry than me that said, is this the way to improve the roads, or essentially not just drill into the underground storage, but to drill beyond that to reach new gas reserves. None of that was communicated by Black Hills. I don't have any reason to believe that they would do that, but it's a question worth asking, that assurance that this is simply to enhance existing infrastructure and not to increase production in any way. That'd be my. Any other comments, thoughts?
I'm not concerned.
Okay.
I think it'll be good for our community to see what it takes. Like, I feel like we're all really removed from our energy, where it's extracted, what it takes to the distribution lines. And so, I mean, I'm assuming that maybe Pickens County or we will do a little bit of like, we don't want anybody to panic when they see these trucks and think that suddenly drilling is happening up there, but just for new wells. But if it ever did, that's what it would look like.
Right.
You know, so I think sometimes little bits like this are good to make our community more aware, because I feel like we kind of forget sometimes as a town where energy comes from.
Yeah. And if you've ever hiked the Lorax Trail and maybe seen the compressor station, it's really amazing. I mean, the infrastructure there is moving gas from maybe not quite Rifle, but Silt area all the way to Avon. And that's kind of the control center where they're compressing the gas and moving it. And it's pretty amazing. So anyway, Janet, I know you have plenty of projects beyond that don't include stuff like this, so thanks for your time and helping us be informed about it.
No, it was helpful. It was interesting, and I agree. Sometimes we're a little bit insulated, and we just, you know, the heat's on, and you don't think about it. But it's a good reminder, and we'll be out there taking pictures.
We'll be taking pictures for our next FMLD grant application.
You say that with all seriousness, I hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Impacts.
That's how we did the undergrounding on the highway. Was from a group of fracking trucks which came through town.
Okay.
Support that grant application.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. Back ahead of schedule. All right.
Thanks.
Item number 9, First Amendment to the library lease.
Sure. In 2014, after 2 different RFP processes, the town entered into a lease for the former library. At that point, it was CCH and Aspen Stage. Both those entities have changed their names as their groups have evolved to Dance Initiative, Inc. and Carbondale Arts. It was a 5-year lease. In there, they had the option to renew for another 5 if they gave us notice. We received a letter in August saying, hey, town, we want to renew this. We've gone through kind of a on and off negotiation with them on what that should be included. Originally, they wanted to extend it 5 years and then have another 5-year option to renew. And at the staff level, we were a little uncomfortable about the uncertainty of 10 years going out on that building, both the age of the building, where those groups have been awesome tenants, but where they might evolve to over that 10-year period. We'll see different leadership in those time periods and stuff. So we came back and said, how about just a 5-year renewal? And after some discussions, we ended up with language that it's a 5-year renewal, but we'll give them 2 years notice if we're not going to renew the lease. The idea behind that is, particularly with Dance Initiative, the amount of infrastructure built into that building, the spring-loaded floors, and the type of space needed for studio space would be rather challenging to find, and they think they need 2 years to both find the facility and remodel it to have it meet their needs. So that's why we included the 2-year renewal notice. In that, or at least then we'll have an automatic 1-year renewal period because we've got to give them 2 years if we're going to void the lease. So that's why it's written that way. I think it's fair, gives them some certainty. Dance Initiative has invested significantly in the building, as has Carbondale Arts. There's well over $100,000 in outside landscaping. I don't have an exact number on the inside, but I'm guessing over 200 on inside remodel. Our base lease basically outlines that the town does the major repairs on the building, and the tenants do the kind of ongoing everyday maintenance. And so we keep the rent very modest, but we actually put that money aside for repairs on the building, so we don't really net stuff to the town. So recently, the last couple of years, we've been working on replacing the windows. If you've been in there, the seals in the windows have gone. So each year we've been doing upgrades along those lines. Basically, with the tenants initiating those, they come to us and say, hey, town, this is what we want to do. And we go, great, we'll include that in this year's upgrades. And we just continue to do basic work on the building. But they've been excellent tenants. When we first entered into the lease with them, some of the town board members were concerned, and the reason it was a longer time period was, would this really create vitality downtown? That was one of the major focuses of the RFP process, is to have a real active, facility which drives folks to the downtown area and helps the downtown vitality. I think from all measurements, they've exceeded that expectation. Even some of the board members who were not really that excited about this use or whether this would really function downtown have come back and said, wow, you know, I missed that. They've really made this work. So from the staff perspective, we support this renewal. We think it makes sense. It was a good compromise for not to go for full 10 years to 5.5 and giving them a 2-year notice if for some reason we're not going to renew it. So that's kind of where we stand. It was, you know, working with both Peter and Amy on this is one of the easier negotiations. It's not a arm wrestling match. It's like, here's our issues, here's my issues, let's figure it out. And that's how we ended up with this.
Questions?
One other thing to clarify, we did build in some language which would allow some subleasing of the outdoor space. If for some reason we were to lose the 4th Street Plaza, the idea that using 4th Street for more public activities could blend into the launch pad grounds, that little amphitheater and stuff. So we built in some language that within their means that they would be willing to basically sublet that out to groups that we are renting the right of way to. So there's some language along, and that's where that came from. Hopefully we don't get there, but at the time we were concerned if we lost 4th Street, how would we, the 4th Street Plaza, how would we accommodate some of those public events? So there's a little bit of protection on that in here.
Cool.
It just wouldn't be the same. I'm trying to picture events in that little area, but
we thought it would be more like the blend over where you might have a VIP section or the little music in the little amphitheater or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. No questions? Anybody want to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the first lease amendment for the former Gordon Cooper Library by and between the town of Carbondale and Carbondale Arts and Dance Initiative, Inc.
Second.
Motion by Lonnie, seconded by Erica. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. All right.
And just for the record, absolute shout out to Carbondale Arts and Dance Initiative for exactly that. I think they're, the vitality that they bring, even when there's not something happening in that space, right? Just because of the physical changes in liveliness to the grounds and the building, not to mention then when all these events are happening. I think you put it in the memo, but really has exceeded everyone's expectations. So it was a great decision 5 years ago. It is now.
It's better to be lucky than good. We went through that. That was a lengthy RFP process to get to that piece.
Well, it's worth it.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Item number 10, road maintenance update. Kevin.
Well, we thought we'd give you a brief update on the chip seal and crack seal project this year. We're at the point that we'll probably go out for the advertise the RFP either next couple days or first part of next week. Just as kind of a little bit of background, probably less for the board members who get to hear me talk about it a couple times a year, but for the public, these are probably the two most cost-effective yet important projects that we do to keep our roads in a serviceable condition. Both of them are intended to keep moisture from getting into the road and deteriorating either the road or the base. The crack seal is basically just intended to deal with the cracks you can visibly see in the surface. We get in there, clean them out, fill them with some material that's actually fairly elastic and can move with the road as it shrinks and swells over different seasons. The chip seal takes care of the more non-visible cracks that still exist. Again, I've been doing this for a while, and I'll go to my grave thinking this is probably the two most important things that a community can do to take care of the roads in a really cost-effective manner. The amount we spend this year to do, I think we came up with close to 46,000 square yards of chip sealing and applying 20,000 pounds of crack sealing material is about what it's going to cost to just repave Meadowwood. So taking that money, spreading it out, making our pavements last longer is really important. So a couple things that changed last year, if you recall, historically the chip seals in this area were apply the oil, the asphalt material, put chips over the top of it, and then come back and, for lack of a better term, paint it black. Historically, that wasn't a bad option because the oils that were used in the past didn't have the ability to grab that aggregate like they do now. So you're basically making a sandwich to try to keep the aggregate on the road. The other piece of that was more of an aesthetic thing. We went away from that last year. It reduced cost by about 18%, and we received no comments, concerns, complaints about the look of the road when we were done. Based on what I've seen, we have zero change in quality. So we're going to continue that this year. There were a couple of maps that we included in the packet. Essentially, this year is going to really focus on the southern end of River Valley Ranch, the Crystal Canyon Drive, and the roads that spur off of it, as well as Perry Ridge and the roads that spur off of it. It'll include snowmass from Highway 133 all the way around to Main Street, now that we got that last little section as part of the snowmass project, trail project last year. And then the last little area is Cleveland Place, West 8th Street and Place, kind of over in that neighborhood. So I don't know, any questions or comments about the areas, what we're doing? It's just more of an update, so you know, both the board and the public are aware of kind of where we're going to be working later in the year.
Well,
And then Lonnie?
Go ahead, Lonnie.
Oh, I was just going to say, I actually received fewer complaints about the lack of the slurry seal on top because it didn't overlap on the curbs, which was aesthetically displeasing to some. So, yeah, I mean, that went away. And like you said, the result was equally good. So, yeah, good call.
So notification, I think the only impact I ever hear about is for people on bikes. And it's only right afterwards before the chip seal, especially, is all ground in. So I'm assuming we're going to post this on like our website so that people know just when it's going to be happening in their neighborhood and that kind of thing.
Yeah, not only do we do that, we'll get some info to the press and other outlets to try to get that message out once we know the contractor's schedule. You know, that's probably, while it's one of the best things we can do for our roads, it's probably the hardest thing to do from a public notification standpoint, just because it's such a fast-moving process, but it's also impacted by weather. So
as soon as you have the window, you have to do it.
Well, it's more, you know, it might, moisture, if it's predicted to rain,
right.
You know, they may start in the morning and then end up stopping at 10 o'clock where you thought maybe they were going to be able to work the whole day, or maybe it was supposed to rain and it didn't, so we're out there. So not only do we do the preemptive, hey, these are the areas and this is kind of the general time frame, the contractor actually also goes door to door ahead of that with at least 24 hours notice, for the people in the neighborhoods, both from a, hey, this is happening, but this is one of the things that probably not out in RVR as much because there's not as much on-street parking, but like over in Cleveland Place, we need folks to move
Big
their
deal.
car
Yeah.
so we can actually do the entire road, because it's not like snowplowing where you can go around the car. You need everything off the road. And, you know, to that end, we'll probably try to do a better job, because that's one thing that I've noticed in the last couple of years. We typically have a couple folks that come home and are like, where's my car? Because we typically tow them, not at their expense. We cover the cost of it, but we usually put them over in the lot over here.
Surprise people sometimes.
And then they're like, ding, ding, ding.
You know, you stole my car.
But sometimes, even when you go door to door with the notification, somebody might be on vacation or whatever. So,
Yeah.
you know, I guess that maybe is another message for the general public. If your car's missing after we chip seal, check the lot across from town hall.
Or
Leave
park
the
it in
keys
the
in
lot.
an envelope.
Park it in the lot yourself 2 days ahead of time.
Cool.
So,
thanks.
Yep.
My only question was just Snowmass Drive. I was surprised to see it on there only because I thought when we took that on as a maintenance, trade-off, I thought we kind of said, and it's in really good shape and we won't have to work on it for a while. So I was just surprised that we needed to work on it within a year.
It's not necessarily that we need to work on that section. There's two reasons that I think it's going to be good to do. One is it's 900 feet of a half-mile road, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense in my mind for future projects, because this is a cyclical thing.
Yeah.
You don't want the majority of the road in 1 year and the other 900 feet 2 years later. The other thing that I think is going to be beneficial, if you recall kind of how that construction happened, we sawed off 2 feet of the edge of the existing road, built the project, and then patched that back. What this will allow us to do is cover that new joint that we created and keep that's just another place for moisture to get in.
Okay, thanks.
Kevin, I like the map using the GIS. It's really clear, and so thank you.
Nate did that, not me.
Yeah. Just one question, and maybe you've told me this in the past, but do you have things now on, like you said, a cycle where these roads are going to, next year and the year after, which roads we're going to do, or do you assess it on an annual or biannual basis to know which ones are deteriorating faster?
So in this process, in general, you'll see these same roads appear in a cycle. Just because unless I know we're going to do a project, for example, Meadowwood, if that would have fallen into this year or next year's cycle, I would have skipped, that, because you don't want to go do something that lasts 7 to 10 years and then tear it up a year later.
Sure.
So the majority of these things will be cyclical, because you're not going to, the deterioration that we see to do a mill and overlay or a more substantial project on there will be evident ahead of that, and we would just leave that road out when it was due based on the cycle. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, if people ask, when's my road going to be done? Can we look out 4 years and say it's going to be done this year, or it depends. It depends on whether or not it remains a priority or not, and we're assessing it on a regular basis.
I will have a much better answer for those types of questions after next year's program. After next year's program, we're going to be in a situation where we can have more certainty of the roads that we do next year will probably be done 7 years from there. We're kind of putting this together more by neighborhood and so the last few years have been trying to kind of make sure that it makes sense from a contracting perspective as well. So, I mean, in general, after next year, if it happened in 2020, it'll happen in 2027 unless something is more substantially going wrong with the road.
Okay.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks, Kevin.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. Item number 11, Dandelion Day Staffing.
So we discussed this quite a bit at the work session last week, and Renee and I had some follow-up discussions with Colin Quinn on this, on kind of what would be the best model. The overall board indicated a desire to provide either a stipend or some independent contracting status for someone to assist on the event. After we looked at it in some more detail, we came to the conclusion that the stipend doesn't really fit any of our contracting models, and we didn't really know, we didn't think that would work. So what we did is we pulled all of our model for independent contracting from the rec department, where we do quite a bit at the rec center, and took all those contracts that we do and the hiring process and how we put that together and provided that to Colin and said, we think this would be a good model for you to follow. So that's why he submitted this revised memo asking for a decision to move forward, using it as an independent contractor status based on really the rec center model. It's reportable income. It follows all the requirements we do with all our independent contractors.
Heather, any thoughts since you didn't get to weigh in last week?
It's just going to let all of you decide. I'm too close to it. How would they, so it's a pretty small contract, so do they pretty much have maximum flexibility on how they would choose that contractor?
I think that would be the intent. Often on kind of these specialty independent contractors, I mean, in general, we always try to advertise them. But say if we're looking for a certain instructor at the rec center, it's not always an ad in the paper. It's someone who's got a skill set that we know who can fill it. And we're kind of looking at that same model. If it was a larger contract, you'd see staff saying absolutely needs to be advertised for everyone to submit proposals. I don't think on the level we're talking here we'd actually generate that much interest, and it probably wouldn't be a wise use of time to go that process.
I think they already have somebody in mind.
Oh, I think they might.
Who says that she would do it.
Yes.
And as we had talked about last week, or at least I had brought up, that I don't think anybody else would do it for that little.
I mean, and part of that is that aspect of like the specialty thing.
Yeah.
It's all there's a certain legacy of information that's been passed on, and so that would be hard to bring in someone totally new and have them get up to speed for that amount of money even, let alone then execute on it. So, yeah.
I think last week the board really discussed this would be, 1 year, keep it alive till the model evolves to something else. So I just want to be clear, I don't think this is a long-term solution to this issue that we have of whether or not to keep Dandelion Days, what level or what size event it should be.
So tell me more about that discussion, just so I can pass that on appropriately. In other words, they need to find.
They were there. Colin, it
Yeah.
was pretty clear.
Yeah.
So that but they have to find a way to make it sustainable without a paid position, or?
We gave a couple different ideas, and I mean, one of it was
chamber,
and also if there have people getting burned out right now, I mean, $1,500 to coordinate a really big event is nothing, So I don't think, I mean, unless Natalie Ray wants to keep doing this for a long time, I have a feeling that's not a very long-term option.
Yeah. Okay.
So
great.
So is that,
Sounds good.
like, to kind of paraphrase that, what I heard was we were essentially helping them buy a year to come up with a long-term strategy. And in no way are we committing to funding a long-term strategy at this point.
No.
We're not saying no to that, but this is not like phase one.
Right.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Like we didn't commit to funding some larger option next year. Like, oh, okay, now you get $15,000 for somebody to do the event.
Right.
And it even says that in this last paragraph of the memo. This approach could serve as a pilot which could be evaluated by the e-board after 2019's Dandelion Day. So I think it's,
because I mean,
although
that's,
I guess pilot sounds more like something that might be continued forever.
yeah, because we've funded Dandelion Days for years through the e-board's budget. They always use part of their budget for Dandelion Days. But you're saying as a funding a paid position as a permanent solution.
And I would say that I happen to think that the way our rec department in the town, because we provide in-kind from Public Works as well, the way we manage results or manage events works really well. And so I just don't want to fix what ain't broken. And so, like, to me, that was a message that I wanted to send is all of a sudden the town getting in the business of organizing this, to me, is a slippery slope for me because it's working so well.
Right, but none of those resources were ever available to Dandelion Days, and I don't know enough of the background as to, like, how it got there. But, like, there's a lot of background to it as an event, but not a town event, but an e-board event, and then kind of an e-board event, but not really. And so I agree, but those aren't resources that put on Dandelion Days ever.
Right.
It was always volunteer. So that's, if that's like one of their options that legitimately the town take it on, that's a discussion. But like, they've never had that available to them.
Well, and I don't mean just Parks and Rec events, but I mean, if you look at the list, most of the events are planned by other organizations that we help.
Yes.
And to me, that's the ideal model. We've picked a couple that we want as town events, like Oktoberfest and things that the rec department, and it just seems to work really well that way.
Yeah.
And
I think Dandelion Days always fell in this really weird gray area.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough to become an outside thing, but it didn't want to be necessarily taken on as another town event. So it was always in this weird
I
limbo.
think part of that's the way we staff the e-board, that the e-board doesn't have a home with like a specific department. Mark provides some staff support because of the level of expertise and utilities and environmental tie-in, but we don't have like a department which it lives in. So the other events where you see, it's more tied to the rec department or, some of the other, a lot of our, I think some of the issues we see as we work with the board on a broader sense is it just doesn't fit with one department with the town. I mean, Bike and Ped, there's kind of a home for it. Parks and Rec, there's a home for it. Planning Commission, but e-board has a certain level of autonomy on it, and that creates some opportunities and also some challenges. And
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I know they appreciate the support, and I think that in those solutions that they're trying to figure out, we should acknowledge that like limbo land and help them with pretty definitive answers. What's on the table from a town's perspective and what would be off the table as they figure that out. And I'm going to keep the pressure on them because there kind of tends to be like they need to pick up the discussion now to have a plan for a year from now. And sometimes that's hard for them to just keep it on the radar enough to work through those solutions. So I'll try and make sure that that's the case.
They gave me that impression that they know that. So
yeah, good.
Well, and then to Erica's point last week, I mean, you mentioned the biking event that went away. And so maybe this is one of those that needs to sustain the acid test to see if there's really enough local interest to keep it going. And if there's a sense that, well, gee, this isn't happening, what went on, then it'll rally some volunteerism to help support that and to help put it on. And from that may spring up some new ideas to freshen it up or something. But yeah, I mean, as Marty said too, some of these events have been put on by folks that have aged out. So, if the demographic has changed and the interest level has changed enough that maybe the way it is doesn't fit anymore, then it's an opportunity to revitalize it going forward.
Great.
Okay. Geez, I already put my stuff away.
Do we need a motion?
We do need a motion.
Oh.
I would move that we approve the request for funding of $1,500 for an independent contractor to organize Dandelion Day.
Second.
Motion by Ben, seconded by Luis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no.
And now that I've made a motion to approve funding, we do have this somewhere in the budget.
We do have it overall.
There, I mean,
Okay.
that's the thing, is
That's
it's
the
already
budget.
there.
I meant to ask
budget.
that, and
Like,
then I
it's
got
already
distracted
carved out
in
of
my
their
haste
budget.
to make a motion.
And I was clear of that in the beginning, is like the 1,500
Right.
that comes out of it, but
It's-
they used that last year and pretty much made money in some respects.
Right.
So I think that it's good if they can figure that out, where then it's a wash.
It seems to me like the ideal would be that at some point, a coalition of environmental groups with some leader group take this on as like, you know, the energy and environment thing. Like, it's not, I mean, it's evolved. I'm not looking at you, Erica, don't worry. But
No, but you know how they're getting together these, so they started doing like, basically all the regional e-boards come together.
Mhm.
That could be a really exciting
Yeah.
way to do it, that it was around this event and actually started to bring together not just the e-boards from around the valley, but citizens from around the valley with
Yeah.
that focus.
and maybe with a little more clear purpose statement to it or whatever.
Right.
Because it has been a limbo sort of thing. Like, it's not really clear
Even
what is
Dandelion
it.
Days is just morphed depending on who
That's what I
was
mean.
leading
That,
it, you know.
Dandelion Days itself, and that's kind of cool. But at some point, that probably needs to evolve to something a little bit more formal and purposeful.
Well, if there's a centralized theme, I mean, it seems to me that the dandelion theme would lend well to the revitalization of, let's say, the beneficial bee population, as an
Right.
example.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of value statement that can come out of that,
Yeah.
if that were to be chosen as something. But anyway,
And just move more to that model, Dan, that you're mentioning, where these other festivals have kind of a group that takes it on and owns it, and the town provides some support, but doesn't fully own it and staff it and all that.
Yeah.
So I hope within the next year we can see some proposal, something like that. Or, yeah, maybe give it a rest.
I just had a question on the first page of the finance.
Oh.
So because this is kind of our summary of 2018 sales tax, right? So it says, ended the year 6.2 above 2017. This was due
What page are you on there, Heather? Sorry.
in the
The very
packets.
first. Sorry, got it.
131.
Got it.
Due to an exception, one-time vendor payment,
Mm.
comparing sales tax revenue without the exception was 7.7 above 2000. Wouldn't they be flip-flopped? I'm confused. We didn't
No.
pay the vendor, the vendor paid us?
Vendor paid us, which
Sales
they
tax?
collected for years in 2017, which gave about a $60,000 bump.
In 2017.
In 2017. So we brought in extra money. We basically dropped that out of the equation because it was a one-time payment. As we
Comparing
were
2018
projecting
to
into 2000, what we were finishing out 2018.
Got it.
So if you left that in 2017, we're at 6.2. If you drop that one-time payment out, we're at 7.7. Dan and I had a similar discussion this morning on that. It's a little bit new math-like, but basically with that one-time payment, we knew it wasn't
Got
coming.
it.
What's most interesting when you look at that is the retail sales, which continue to grow, and how much we're dealing with the online sales tax payments and folks more voluntarily paying those. So there's kind of a gray area still on the state side. So we see a lot of vendors actually not buy sales tax licenses like they should, but actually send us checks in. So they don't license themselves because we don't need to do that, but they send us the money they
They're
collect.
voluntary, because they know the licensing will come soon.
Yeah.
So online sales are primarily in the retail sales
Yes.
category or entirely? Pretty much entirely?
Entirely.
And then, was that payment taken out of the graphs? So on the graph, that's sales tax revenue year to date? Do you know? And or was it in a particular category?
I'm not sure how she had categorized it. Okay. I can't answer that if it's shown on the actual graph or not. I believe it is.
Okay.
We basically dropped it out of the equation when we were doing the projections off future years as that one-time bump. And that was actually from a vendor which was selling upper-end furnishings in town, mostly on the interior design stuff.
Oh, yeah.
In some of the bigger houses over a long period of time. And then they did an audit and said, oh, we hadn't paid this to the town.
Interesting.
But just to be clear, the projections at least matched, if not slightly exceeded, our budget expectations.
Yeah.
So we're okay.
We had budgeted a 3% increase year over year.
We budgeted 3, but in our projections, as we adopted our budget, we included 7.
Yes, right. Gotcha.
So, and we basically are at 7.7, so we were pretty close on.
Right, as we adopted
yeah.
this year's.
Yes.
Yep.
And then for the 2019 was a 3%. And we'll see.
On that 7.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how December receipts come. They've been, so far, payments in January for December collections has been kind of flat. So we don't have all the numbers yet, but right now they appear flat.
So you saw in receipts some of the anecdotal that we heard about November and December?
Didn't see that for November, if you look at your numbers.
It was still strong.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. You can't zero in on one, but just kind of more general stuff.
Yeah.
This December, not breaking down by category, but just generally, we're not going to see the bump that we were seeing across the.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We're adjourned. So.